I've been thinking a lot about video game history, thinking about where we started to where we are now, just within only the past couple of decades, and to see how much the game industry has reiterated on itself time and time again. And I look at a game like Doom that I'm currently playing on my analog pocket, a game that is literally over 30 years old, made in 1993, and was literally the pioneer of and invented the first-person shooter genre. And to jump to 2025, over 30 years later, and we're on the cusp of another Doom game coming out called Doom: The Dark Ages. And I start to think about, again, where we started to where we are. I think about the same thing with accessibility. It was only just barely even over a decade ago that we had options like inverting controls or remapping, and that was kind of considered evolutionary at a time. Not say that happened 10 years ago, but I hope you understand what I mean. But to jump to now 2025, and we're seeing games that have a large suite of options and accessible design, and seeing that part of the industry be revolutionized or pioneering in certain ways. I also even think about my own history, in that it was only a couple years ago that I played Doom Eternal for the first time. And I remember I did my review where I said I was not mad, I was disappointed about the accessibility in that game. And to jump to Doom: The Dark Ages makes me kind of wonder, did we revolutionize that? Did we pioneer, as the folks at id Software like to say? Did they make a game, a Doom for all Slayers? Let's find out.
Hi, I'm Steve Saylor. I'm blind. If you're wondering what I can see when I'm playing video games and how I can play video games if I'm blind, take a look at the video here or link in the description down below. So I recorded that intro in PAX East in Boston just a few days ago because I was in the middle review and I just wanted to be able to get my thoughts out on camera, and none of it worked for the review, but that intro was cool, so I wanted to keep that in there. So I'm back home and I'm going to talk about Doom: The Dark Ages for accessibility. Before I do, though, I do have to give a disclaimer. I was brought in by id Software to consult on the game, so I got to be also put into the credits. So thanks so much to id Software and Bethesda for including me as part of the game. But I do have to say this. I say this every time I get to consult on a game that I also review, is that I was paid to consult. I was not paid to review. So these are my honest thoughts about Doom: The Dark Ages, and they have no reflection on what I actually consulted on. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Now let's get into the review. Doom: The Dark Ages is fun as fuck. I'm sorry. It's fun. I love playing this game. I tried to be able to play Doom Eternal, and I even looked at my old review of Doom Eternal, and I remember saying that I was not mad, I was disappointed in the accessibility of this game, and I was hoping that their next entry would take accessibility into account. And I think that they did. One of the things that id Software, the studio heads, had said about the game is what they wanted to do with the Dark Ages was they wanted to make a Doom for all Slayers. And what they were talking about initially was the difficulty sliders that you get to adjust for within the game. But it goes beyond that. Is it fully accessible? No, I will say that. There are definitely several things that are missing that also kind of don't really work, and in regards to some of the game design elements that they wanted that they implemented into the game are not inherently accessible, and there's not enough options to be able to fix that for some folks. I will say that probably the two biggest misses from this is there's no screen reader or there's no navigational assist, and some of the gameplay elements, like being able to fly the dragon or get into basically a mech suit, which I will talk about in a few minutes, it basically does not fully work as we would best like it, especially for the blind community. So I'll probably say that, yeah, I would say probably a Doom for all Slayers, maybe a Doom for most Slayers in regards to what they're able to do. They did fill a lot of the disability spectrum, which is great, and honestly actually opens up the franchise to new players and new disabled players that they haven't been able to before, just not necessarily fulfilling that Doom for all Slayers saying that they wanted to do for this. But I do have to give credit where credit is due. I think probably the biggest thing I could talk about is the difficulty sliders, or at least the difficulty options when you're going through before you even start playing the game. So as usual, you do get to choose a few options for difficulty, and normally you can just like pick one, whether it's normal or hard or nightmare, whatever you want, and then you just jump right into the game. But before the game even starts, you do have the option to be able to adjust your experience to best suit however you want to be able to play. You want the game to be faster and frantic and more like hard hitting, you can totally do that. If you want the game to be able to slow down so you can be able to react fast enough, or you just want to create a Doom that is an absolute badass tank that can take any damage and basically cut through enemies like butter, you can totally do that too. And I think that's probably the most standout feature of this game. I could talk about individual settings like game speed, which is such a huge godsend. I love that feature in any time that it shows up in a game, and I was able to set it to about 80% of the game speed, and it was just enough for most types of combat. But when I was in an arena with a lot of enemies, including boss enemies, I dropped it down to roughly about 50-60%, and it was just enough that made me still feel like it was a challenge, but also enough gives me enough reaction time for me to be able to react with my own disability and it'll not let it get in the way, which is awesome. You can also adjust the damage given from enemies and damage to enemies. You can be able to adjust when resources are more plentiful or less plentiful, which is pretty dope. You can adjust enemy aggression, enhance targeting. You can adjust the parry window from small to large. And you can be able to adjust the enemy projectile speed from slow to fast. And I'll kind of talk about some of that within the gameplay. So there's 3 modes of gameplay that I have to talk about. First of which is the kind of the grounded tank-like experience that you're going to have with this game. If you remember, if you tried to play Doom Eternal, you might have noticed that there was a lot of jumping around, a lot of platforming, and you had to constantly be moving in order for you to be able to even do any types of damage, and also to avoid getting hit, because basically you were a tank, but you also were very vulnerable to a lot of attacks. And that was kind of my biggest gripe, was because I couldn't be able to do the platforming, couldn't be able to do the jumping, and being able to dodge a lot of the enemy attacks that I was receiving. However, with this sort of now grounded version of Doom, it harkens back to the original Doom that I mentioned in the beginning, where a majority of the time you're actually strafing back and forth. And that's actually kind of, once I realized that it was a kind of original Doom gameplay style, I really got into it. I was like, okay, I get this. This is a traditional Doom game, just in a modern 2025 version, which I love. Now, part of that is that strafing gameplay is that there are things you can be able to parry. Now, there are a lot of enemy projectiles that are being thrown at you as the Doom Slayer, and some of which you can be able to block with your shield, which I will talk about in a minute. But then there are some that you can be able to block or parry to be able to send that projectile back to the enemy. This was actually a very cool concept that I feel was probably made me feel more like a badass, and using that shield made me it was like one of my favorite aspects of the game, and I hope that they continue to use it in future versions of Doom if they decide to be able to create more of them, because it was just as cool as using the super shotgun in previous games, which, if you know, you know. Now, in terms of accessibility for that, a lot of the enemy projectiles are red, and the parryable ones are green. Good thing is that if you're worried about for color blindness, there is not only colorblind settings, but there are also the ability to be able to change the color of those parryable attacks. You can find a color that works best for you, and that you always know which projectiles are the ones you can be able to block and or parry, which is awesome. Now, speaking of color changes, I wanted to talk about high contrast mode for just a second. This is the one that I like a lot. However, it is a weird way to go about it that I hope gets patched in a future update. There are two types of high contrast mode settings in the settings menu. There's high contrast mode, which basically adds a shadow to the HUD elements that are on screen. But that's not the high contrast mode. What is high contrast mode is you have to go and find the setting called world desaturation. And it's a weird way to turn that on. You actually have to enable it by about, like, it's a slider that you have to enable to about 10%, which unlocks all of the color settings where you can be able to add a color shader for your enemies, for projectiles, for interactable objects. That's the only way for you to be able to adjust that, which is kind of a weird way to go about it. Even though world desaturation, if you put up to 100%, will put the entire environment into black and white, it does feel a bit weird that I have to basically enable it by 10%, or which is the lowest setting you could set to, in order to be able to adjust all the different colors for high contrast mode. Again, I hope that's going to be a patch feature, like in the future, because that's a bit confusing. I hope if you have any trouble trying to find high contrast mode, I hope that helps. I hope also gets patched in as well, or at least changed a little bit, and this is actually something I heard from some of my friends who were reviewing this game, in that they were having trouble being able to know when there was enemies attacking them from off camera. And normally that is kind of a setting that would be geared towards deaf and hard of hearing players, but in this case there was nothing on that was by default that would let you know if there was any projectiles or any enemies that were attacking you. Normally you could see that as a little visual indicator of like an arrow pointing to somewhere off camera, so that you know in order to focus your rage upon. But there is a setting that actually will enable that. It's just off by default. If you look for threat detection, you can have the option to either keep it off, parryable attacks only, or completely on. That will let you see all attacks that are happening from off screen. So I'm not sure why it's not on by default. So hopefully, again, that can be fixed in a patch in a future update. As far as the individual gameplay modes, there are essentially 3 different modes you can be able to play in Doom: The Dark Ages. There's the grounded, sort of regular Doom. You're shooting at things, and they're shooting at you, and you have to take them out in any way possible, and that's great. But then there's also 2 new kind of gameplay modes that are for Doom: The Dark Ages. There is one where you get to pilot a giant mech suit attacking giant demons, and it's kind of almost a Super Punch-Out sort of type gameplay, where you're basically just constantly punching with right trigger and then using the left shoulder button in order to be able to do a very powerful attack, which is fine. It's not the most accessible way to be able to do it, but it is a very basic sort of control scheme that it's very linear in regards to the level design for it. You're not necessarily having to be able to go into a larger open map, at least from what I've been able to play so far. Again, I've been busy with PAX. I haven't been able to finish the game fully just yet. But from what I've been able to play, majority of those kind of levels are just straightforward run and gun, or basically run and punch, as it were. Third type of gameplay is when you are piloting a dragon, and it is as cool to play as it sounds and it looks. You are in a mechanized dragon that it has gun turrets and a massive mechanical wings that you can be able to fly around on these maps. There is sort of a parryable attack that you have to do, because there are some times where you go up against very large demon ships, and the way that you're able to take them out is you have to take out certain turrets in order for an area to be able to be opened up, so you can be able to land on the ship to be able to take them out from the inside. Now, the little mini game that basically gets to play whenever you're trying to take out the turrets, you can't just shoot at it and that's it. There are parryable attacks that are happening and unparryable attacks. So, but the thing is, you have to kind of time it just perfectly because there are, it's more of a large area of effect. You have to try to find the gap in that area of effect in order to be able to dodge out of the way before you get hit. And that's also how you can be able to lock on to the enemy or to lock onto the turret and be able to destroy it, is if you find a green parryable sort of area effect, you dodge out of the way and you're able to take them out pretty like within that mini game. It's kind of hard to explain, but that's hopefully the gameplay that I'm showing right now will kind of at least give you an idea of what it feels like. It's not to say that all three of the gameplay modes are get less and less accessible. There are some universal design. There is some audio cues that do help a lot of players. I just do feel that at least for blind players, the more you get away from the grounded gameplay and into either the mechs or the dragon, it does get a little bit more difficult to be able to ascertain what information you need to in order to be able to move forward. And because these modes are indicative to the moving forward with the story, they will be blockers if you're not able to play this independently. And totally blind players, you might need some sighted assistance in order to be able to continue to play. Overall, I do have to give id Software a lot of credit for trying to be able to open up the Doom franchise to more players. I remember being said that when Doom Eternal was coming out, the developers had said that they wanted to make a Souls-like game set in the FPS genre, and I think they delivered. It is a difficult and challenging game that unfortunately I was not able to play because they didn't include a lot of accessibility at that time. But jump to Doom the Dark Ages, and I think that they delivered in two categories. They delivered in the way that if you've never played an FPS game before, or you had trouble playing an FPS game, there is enough settings and game design there that can open up the Doom franchise to you for the first time, while also serving those with disabled players. There is definite intention there for accessibility for disabled players, and I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. I think the two categories are very well put together, in that if you've never been able to play a Doom game before, whether you're disabled or not, this is the game to jump into, and I fully believe that. Is it perfect? Does it hit all Slayers as they try? No, but they definitely gave a massive effort. And it's a massive, drastic difference between Doom Eternal and Doom the Dark Ages. So yes, it's not perfect. But yes, it also does include a lot of options and a lot of customizability for players to be able to jump into Doom and feel like a badass Slayer, basically taking on the hordes of hell. Again, is it perfect? No. Do I hope that there will be future updates where it can actually be able to make more accessibility and actually include more new Slayers into the fold? Yes, I think so. I think I can see that there is a commitment there from id Software for accessibility, and I do hope that, and I do think that they will keep including us disabled players as they move into future either Doom projects or whatever other project that id Software likes to be able to jump into. Which is why I'm going to give Doom the Dark Ages a 3.5 out of 5. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to be able to subscribe to this channel, because we've been doing a lot more here talking about the gaming news, accessibility news, and anytime I get a chance to be able to preview anything for anything that's happening in the video game industry, I will do this on this channel. So thank you so much. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.